Hi, this is Rachel again, and I'm excited to provide the summary review of the information you learned when reading Chapter 1, The Foundations of Psychological Science, in your text Introduction to Psychology, Gateways to Mind and Behavior by Kuhn, Mitterer, and Martini. But before I do, please remember that this is not an inclusive summary of everything covered in the book and discussed in class. To adequately prepare for your weekly skills exam, and to fully understand this material, it will be helpful to read each chapter before our class discussion. In Chapter 1, the authors introduce you to the discipline of psychology. The chapter explains why psychology is a science and what psychologists do. In addition, a brief history of psychological science is provided, and the contemporary perspectives and the biopsychosocial model are discussed. Goals of contemporary psychology and the roles of critical thinking and the scientific methods are reviewed. Experimental and non-experimental research methods used in psychology are described, along with the strengths and drawbacks of each approach. The chapter ends with a discussion of information literacy and applying critical thinking skills to evaluate information on social media. Let's begin. What factors shaped you into who you are right now? You might suspect such things as your genetic heritage, your race and ethnicity, your gender, your family and friends, your neighborhood, tragedies or trauma in your life that are sudden, or the culture in which you grew up or now live. You also might have noticed that you are like some people you know, very much unlike others. So you might suspect that everyone's life is shaped by a complex set of factors. In Chapter 1, we start by defining human development as the multidisciplinary study of how people change and how they remain the same over time. One question that researchers and psychologists consider, and often argue about, is whether human personality is predetermined through heredity, i.e., your genetic makeup, or more from the environment in which we live. These philosophies are the basis of three fundamental theories we should consider: nature and nurture, continuity and discontinuity, and universal and context-specific development. The consensus of most personality experts is that a person's development is a blend of these characteristics. For example, some of your characteristics remain the same through life, referred to as continuity, and other characteristics change throughout our lives, referred to as discontinuity. Because these characteristics apply to all the topics in the book and will be the focus of class discussion, I will provide you with a quick definition of each. In Chapter 1, you read about three fundamental issues or theories of human development. These theories try to describe how people change and how they remain the same over time. Can you list and describe the key aspects of each theory? The first is the nature-nurture issue, which involves the degree to which genetics and the environment influence human development. Nature and nurture are mutually interactive influences. Development is shaped by both. The next is the continuity-discontinuity issue, which concerns whether the same explanations, continuity, or different explanations, discontinuity, must be used to explain changes in people over time. Continuity approaches emphasize quantitative change. Discontinuity approaches emphasize qualitative change. The third is the issue of universal versus context-specific development. The question is whether development follows the same general path in all people or fundamentally depends on the sociocultural context. After reading about the theories of human development, the authors introduce the biopsychosocial framework, which focuses on three basic forces that influence continued human development across our lifespan. Can you remember these three basic forces in the biopsychosocial framework and the key aspects of each? The three primary forces that shape our development are: 1. Biological forces include all genetic and health-related factors that affect development. Many of these biological forces are determined by our genetic code. 2. Psychological forces include all internal cognitive, emotional, perceptual, and personality factors that influence development. Collectively, psychological forces explain the most noticeable differences in people. And 3. Sociocultural forces include interpersonal, societal, cultural, and ethnic factors that affect development. Culture consists of the knowledge, attitudes, and behavior associated with a group of people. Overall, sociocultural forces provide the context or backdrop for development. The biopsychosocial framework emphasizes that the three forces are mutually interactive. Development cannot be understood by examining the forces in isolation. Furthermore, the same event can have different effects, depending on when it happens. In a sense, the biopsychosocial framework is an attempt to explain the why behind the changes and differences in human development. Although there are no truly comprehensive theories of human development, four general perspectives influence current research: psychodynamic theory, learning theory, cognitive theory, and ecological and systems theory. These developmental theories organize knowledge so as to provide testable explanations of human behaviors and the ways in which they change over time. Current approaches to developmental theory focus on specific aspects of behavior. Psychodynamic theories propose that behavior is determined by the way people deal with conflicts they face at different ages. Erikson proposed a lifespan theory of psychosocial development consisting of 8 universal stages, each characterized by a particular struggle. Learning theory focuses on the development of observable behavior. Operant conditioning is based on the notions of reinforcement, punishment, and environmental control of behavior. Social learning theory proposes that people learn by observing and interpreting others' behavior. Cognitive developmental theory focuses on thought processes. Piaget proposed a 4-stage universal sequence based on the notion that throughout development, people create theories to explain how the world works. King and Kitchener extended these ideas through adulthood. And finally, ecological or systems theory views human development as inseparable from the environmental contexts in which a person develops. Neuroscience is an amalgamation of medical, evolutionary, and computational disciplines, fostering a deeper understanding of how the more than the approximately 85 billion nerve cells in the human brain are born, how they grow, and interconnect to form human thoughts and actions. The brain consists of several discrete parts, most notably the cerebrum, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. The cerebrum consists of 6 brain areas that span 2 hemispheres. 4 of these areas can be seen from the external view of the brain, shown in the image displayed: the frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobes. The 2 other lobes, the limbic and insular lobes, are found within the cerebrum. The outermost part of the cerebrum is called the cortex, or sometimes the neocortex. This contains a sheet of neurons that wraps around all the lobes of the brain and is roughly 1.53 millimeters thick. Neurons are the principal communicators of the brain. They are involved in sending signals from one region to another and ultimately triggering actions, encoding and retrieving memories, and creating the experience of being, well, alive. A dense collection of neurons are found within the cortex and other areas within the limbic and insular lobes. Neurons send the messages, and a variety of other cells, called glial cells, support and facilitate this communication. Some of the most crucial and well-studied parts of the brain are the frontal cortex, located at the very front of the frontal lobe, plays a role in a range of cognitive functions, including attention, decision-making, planning complex behaviors, and regulating social actions. This is typically termed executive function. The middle of the brain, in the parietal lobe, roughly just after the border of the frontal cortex, is involved in both motor processing, the feeling of touch, and in motor coordination, movement. These aren't the only brain areas involved in these processes, but they are the principal actors. The occipital cortex is involved in sight. It features many different layers, each of which processes a different component involved in perceiving the world visually. The temporal lobes are largely discussed for their relevance in language. The left side of the brain features Wernicke's and Broca's areas, involved in speech comprehension and speech production, respectively. There is a bit more complex than this seems to state, but the general concept holds true. Within the brain, there are several other regions that are of note, including the basal ganglia, a collection of regions involved in action selection, the hippocampi involved in memory processing, and the amygdalae involved in fear processing. Now, let's take a look at how the science of psychology can theorize, test, and explain human behavior. The scientific method is a systematic approach used by scientists to investigate and understand the natural world. It typically involves making observations, formulating a hypothesis, conducting experiments or gathering data, analyzing the results, and drawing conclusions. The scientific method enables us to test a hypothesis and distinguish between the correlation of two or more things happening in association with each other and the actual cause of the phenomenon we observe. The 6 steps to the scientific method are 1. Making an observation. 2. Asking a question. 3. Forming a hypothesis. 4. Conducting an experiment. 5. Analyzing the data. And 6. Reporting the conclusions. The first step in the scientific method is asking a question you want to answer. This question will include one of the key starters: how, what, when, why, where, who, or which. The question you ask should also be measurable and answerable through experimentation. It is often something that can be measured with a numerical result, although behavioral results are also part of the scientific method. With your question formulated, the next step is to conduct preliminary background research to prepare yourself for the experiment. You can find information through online searches or in your local library, depending on the question you are asking and the nature of the background data. You may also find previous studies and experiments that can help with your process and conclusions. During the third step, you will create your hypothesis, which is an educated guess that seeks to answer a question that can be systematically tested. Your hypothesis should also include predictions that you can measure through experimentation and research. Next, test your hypothesis by experimenting. Your experiment is a way to quantifiably test your predictions and should be able to be repeated by another scientist. In the fifth step, you can now take your experiment findings and analyze them to determine if they support your hypothesis. Drawing a conclusion means determining whether what you believed would happen did happen. If it did not happen, you can create a new hypothesis, return to step 4, and conduct a new experiment to prove your new theory. If what you hypothesized happened during the experimentation phase, the final step is putting together your findings and presenting them to others. In the final step, you will present your findings. The method by which you do this depends on your scientific position and level. If you are entering a project into the science fair, you will likely communicate your findings in a written report, on a display board, or during a presentation at the event. If you are a scientist by profession, you may present your findings in a scientific publication or to your supervisors. I would like to provide the definitions you should know to help prepare you for your weekly quiz and final project. Behaviorism, school of thought in psychology that emphasizes study of observable actions over study of the mind. Bias sample, a subpart of a larger population that does not accurately reflect characteristics of the whole population. Biopsychosocial model, an approach acknowledging that biological, psychological, and social factors interact to influence human behavior and mental processes. Cognitive psychology, the study of information processing, thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. Confirmation bias, the tendency to remember or notice information that fits one's expectations, while forgetting or ignoring discrepancies. Control group, subjects in an experimental study who do not receive the treatment being investigated. Correlation, the existence of a consistent, systematic relationship between two events, measures, or variables. Correlation coefficient, a statistical index ranging from -1.00 to 1.00 that indicates the direction and degree of correlation. Correlational research, descriptive study that quantifies the degree to which events, measures, or variables are associated. Cultural relativity, the idea that behavior must be judged relative to the values of the culture in which it occurs. Dependent variable, the element of an experiment that measures any effect of the manipulation. Double-blind study, Research in which neither the observer nor the subjects know which subjects received which treatment. Evolutionary psychology, approach that emphasizes inherited, adaptive aspects of behavior and mental processes. Experiment, a study in which the investigator manipulates at least one variable while measuring at least one other variable. Experimental group, group that receives the treatment the study is designed to test. Functionalism, school of psychology that considers behaviors in terms of active adaptations. Gestalt psychology, study of thinking, learning, and perception in whole units, not by analysis into parts. Humanistic psychology, study of people as inherently good and motivated to learn and improve. Hypothesis, predicted outcome of an experiment, or an educated guess about the relationship between variables. Natural selection, Darwin's theory that evolution favors those plants and animals best suited to their living conditions. Naturalistic observation, observing behavior as it unfolds in natural settings. Observational data, data that come from watching participants and recording their behavior. Observer bias, the tendency of an observer to distort observations or perceptions to match his or her expectations. Observer effect, changes in an organism's behavior brought about by an awareness of being observed. Participants, humans whose behavior is investigated in an experiment. Physiological data, data that come from participants' physiological processes, including measures of the brain and heart, muscles, and the production of hormones. Placebo, inactive substance or treatment that is distinguishable from a real, active substance or treatment. Placebo effect, changes in behavior due to participants' expectations that a drug or other treatment will have some effect. Population, the entire group of people from which a sample is drawn. Prediction, in psychology, an ability to accurately forecast behavior. Psychology, the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Random assignment, use of change to place subjects in experimental and control groups. Representative sample, a small randomly selected part of a larger population that accurately reflects characteristics of the whole population. Researcher bias, changes in participants' behavior caused by the unintended influence of a researcher's actions. Scientific method, a form of critical thinking based on careful measurement, controlled observation, and repeatable results. Scientific observation, an empirical investigation structured to answer questions about the world in a systematic and intersubjective fashion. Self-report data, information that is provided by participants about their own thoughts, emotions, or behaviors, typically on a questionnaire or during an interview. Single-blind study, research in which the subjects do not know which treatment they receive. Social perspective, the focus on the importance of social contexts in influencing the behavior of individuals. Statistically significant, experimental results that would rarely occur by chance alone. Stimulus, any physical energy that an organism senses. Structuralism, study of sensations and personal experience analyzed as basic elements. Structured observation, observing behavior in situations that have been set up by the researcher. Survey, descriptive research method in which participants are asked the same questions. Theory, comprehensive explanation of observable events. Variable, factor or characteristic manipulated or measured in research. Thank you for your attention throughout this summary review. We realize that Chapter 1 was long but essential. We sincerely hope you found it insightful and informative and provides a solid foundation for your understanding of psychological science and research of human behavior. Remember, understanding the stages of psychosocial development can not only help you in the field of psychology, but if you apply the concepts you learn in your own life, you may find the answer to living a life of joy and no regrets.